reason. So I am Jessica Klinga. I'm the Veteran Program Specialist for Brushwood Center. So I manage the IDs Veteran Program. So with the IDs program, the purpose is to connect veterans to nature through nature-based photography, art, music workshops. So we hope you can join us for more programming in the future. So I'll introduce our speakers for today. So Veronica Hinke will be your first speaker. She's a public affairs officer for National Forest Service of Midewin Tallgrass Prairie. So she'll explain more about Midewin that we hope that you can go to, and a little bit more about the challenge. And then Greg Du Bois will be your photography instructor today. And just a quick overview of the Midewin Veteran Photography Challenge. So we have the virtual class today, and then we hope that you will go out to Midewin and take some photos, and then you can submit them to me. And then we are going to post them on a National Forest Service calendar just for veterans and their family members. That's the only people who will be taking the photos that will be in the calendar. And then we're going to also display them at the level of VA. And we have gift bags to give you with trail maps and wildlife information, and I'll be sending up a follow-up email after this. So if you have any logistical questions about getting out to Midewin, please let me know, okay? And we have cameras and gift bags to give you if you would like them. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Veronica.
Hi everyone, I'm gonna share my screen. Right now it's disabled, so I need to get that enabled to show the few slides that I have to present. I just want to give a quick overview. I think there are a couple of new faces. It's really great to see everyone. Like Jessica said, I'm the Public Affairs Officer and Public Services Team Leader at Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie. It's America's National Tallgrass Prairie. Are you able to see my slide?
Just your video for now.
Okay. Let's see here. I'll try again. Share screen. I think I needed to try it again there. Do you see the slide now?
Just you.
Not yet. Me. Okay. Huh. It worked. It's always worked before. So, I don't know. Okay. It's disabled. So.
Oh, actually, may have. Sorry about that. I think I need to give you a co-host. That might be the reason why. So I apologize for that.
Well, you've got enough on your mind today. I can imagine stuff like that happening.
Yeah. Go ahead. You should be able to do it now. I have to make you a co-host for you to do it. So sorry about that.
All right. Is everyone able to see now?
No.
Okay, one more step. How's that?
I think
it's better.
Yay!
All right. Okay, success. Thanks, Jessica. So I just want to say thanks everybody for being here. When we dreamt this up back last fall, and it's just been amazing seeing it coming together. And Jessica, Greg, so many people have been bringing this together and making it happen. It's just been fantastic, and I can't wait to see the pictures. I'm so excited. I just want to tell you really quick about Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie. It is 18,500 acres of public land, 63 of Chicago's Grant Park, 23 Central Parks in New York City. So it's a pretty wide open space, and it's 50 miles from Chicago. So we really want more people to be aware of this wonderful natural resource that's right in their backyard. There it is. It's a little south of Shanahan, which is, of course, west of Joliet. And it's in a darling little 1950s-ish town on Route 66 that really enjoyed its heyday during the Route 66 heyday, called Wilmington. Lots of antique shops, just really cute restaurants and so forth. It's really worth a trip out. The name of Midewin is from the Potawatomi Medicine Society that deals with healing and balance. Midewin was the Joliet Army Arsenal during World War II, the Korean War, and during other times of conflict. And right now it's in a pattern of being restored. It was established 25 years ago. Next February, we'll celebrate our 25th silver anniversary, February 10th. And the reason it was established was for 4 basic purposes, and just really roughly, I'll go through this quick list here. For restoration, for education about conservation and so forth, for environmental research, and third, agriculture, and then for recreation. At one time, there were over 400 bunkers where TNT was stored during World War II. There are still a couple hundred of those left, and we're going to retain some for historical reference. There's one that you can go into on the Group 63 trail, and that's a pretty neat experience. We, as the Forest Service, the USDA Forest Service, are tasked with removing things like the bunkers, railroad tracks, buildings, and other infrastructure. There is a herd of bison at Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie. Midewin is home to these bison as a project to see if they can help with restoration. Bison are America's national mammal. We'll be celebrating them especially, we celebrate them every day, but we'll be celebrating them especially with a virtual program on November 7th, which is National Bison Day. To look for bison, the best starting point is the Iron Bridge Trailhead. You can walk in, it's about a 90-minute walk round trip in and back to spotting scopes, either north or south along the Group 63 trail or along the trail that runs south from the Iron Bridge Trailhead. You can look for them, but you might not always see them. So we have a bison cam, and Public Services staff watches to see if they're visible in posts on Facebook and Twitter. The herd grazes over 1,000 acres, so that's why you might not always see them. That's a really, I think it's a really unshaded trail path that you go on, so make sure to wear sturdy, closed-toed shoes. Bring water with you if it's warm at all. I wouldn't recommend taking a dog because if they have short legs, they wouldn't make the trip. If you do take a dog, definitely bring water for them. There's not much shade there. So we're working with the Nature Conservancy in Illinois in a volunteer outreach that is really making this a community-centric recovery. This is a whole community restoration process, and volunteers are working with over 275 species of native Illinois prairie plants. There are 3 main restoration areas, 2 on the west side, 1 on the east side, South Patrol Road Prairie and Prairie Glacial Plains on the west, Iron Bridge Prairie on the east. There are 3 seed production gardens. It would be immensely expensive for us to go out and buy plugs and seeds continually. So we produce them in 3 different gardens at the River Road seed beds, which is at River Road and Boathouse Road. That's going to be glorious right about now if you're heading out for pictures with absolutely alive with goldenrod. You'll see asters right now. Would highly recommend that. Not today because it's raining, but I would definitely recommend checking out the River Road seed beds. At the Welcome Center, which is currently closed because of COVID-19, and we're trying to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19, but there are seed beds there at the start of the Route 53 trail. So there is a trailhead there. And at Turtle Pond, which was created in the 1960s, it's on the east side. Restoration happens year-round. This is probably one of the most surprising things to people. This is volunteer Sally Weeclaw working with a handheld seed cleaner. In the winter months, it's absolutely fabulous to go out into this horticulture building, and it's just absolutely full of these fragrance, beautiful scents of all the different prairie seeds that have been collected over the year, and they're being cleaned to be separated from their chaff so that they can be returned to the soil in the next season. This is Len LeClaire. I believe that's Len LeClaire. Am I right about that, Greg? Is that Len?
I don't know Len. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm pretty sure that is Len. And he is working with a machine seed cleaner. So there are those as well. Seed is sorted into bags like these in some cases, and the chaff is even brought back to the land so that not a seed is wasted. If any of the seed did not get caught up in the sifting, it is returned to the land during winter broadcasting. And we really try to do our best to be good stewards with the taxpayer money that is funding all of this, and It's just really important to us to not waste a seed, and also just because of the preciousness of seeds and how important they are. During the winter, volunteers are also out very often clearing brush in some of the coldest winter weather. Here's a quick snapshot of some of the recreation and programs that are usually happening at Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie this year, this season, since March. These were converted to virtual programs for the most part. With the ecology, there are fish species, 27 mammals, 15 reptiles, and 22 miles of streams run through the prairie, which is really amazing to think about. It's something that also surprises people. This is leap year, so we've really been having a special spotlight on frogs and toads of Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie. There are 7 different species that have been spotted over the years: American bullfrogs, chorus frogs, cricket frogs, gray tree frogs, green frogs, and northern leopard frogs. And they're actually involved in restoration in a way because agriculture was key on the land before the arsenal. There are still miles of clay drainage tiles that were used for farm irrigation. Those are all being pulled up, and we're working with partners. For one example, just one, the Wetlands Initiative. As each section of the irrigation tiles are pulled up, that provides more habitat for frogs. So if you come out and you hear something that sounds like crickets, it always seems to sound like crickets, you're probably hearing chorus frogs. And you'll hear that a lot at Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie. In 2019 alone, over 2 miles of clay drainage tiles were removed, and that is in continual progress. The rusty patch bumblebee is one of the unusual species that has been spotted at Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie as it becomes a haven for different native prairie species. We're working in a partnership with Olivet Nazarene University to monitor the presence of the rusty patch bumblebee. Every June, you'll hear about bird surveys. That's a tight-knit group that goes out every year to look for dick thistles, bobolinks, and more, and to keep track of, what are we seeing. Greg is an excellent resource on this. He's very aware of the different types of birding that you can do at Midewin. So maybe we'll hear some of that in his talk, and if not, we can ask him about it in the Q&A section. Last year in 2019, we actually saw a painted bunting that was flying off course. Of course, it was not normally supposed to be anywhere near Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie, but it was hanging out at the Turtle Pond area. There have been spottings of wood ducks, black-billed cuckoos, and more. Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie is home to the only interagency hotshot crew in the eastern region of the USDA Forest Service. And they go out on fire assignments. When they're home-based, they work with the Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie Fire Team in prescribed fire, which is a restoration tool that's helping us reduce hazardous fuels, minimizing the spread of plant and animal disease. It helps remove invasive species, and it also improves habitat for native species. It recycles nutrients, and prescribed burning also helps provide for forage. Since COVID-19, prescribed burning has been paused. Every once in a while, you might see a big boat on the prairie, and you might wonder, what is a big boat doing in all that tall grass? One of the instructors for our classes, Ron Capello, took a picture once of a great big boat out in the tall grass. And so if you see that picture, that's by him. We are partnering with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the fight against Asian carp in the Great Lakes, which is a really wonderful opportunity for them to be located closer to the barrier where they can do a lot of their research. And they work right from our building in a service-first partnership. I've been mentioning all along about the differences now since COVID, and we are encouraging people to continue to recreate responsibly when they come out to the prairie, and avoid visiting if you are sick or experiencing COVID-19 symptoms. If you think you might have been exposed, make arrangements to use the restrooms before or after your visit to the Wapansi Trailhead, where those restrooms are currently closed. If an area is crowded, look for a less crowded area, and that includes parking lots. Speaking of parking lots, I wanted to mention that the GPS points to all of the parking areas are on our website. On the home page, there's a spotlight at the bottom to click on, and also on our Facebook if you're looking for direct routing to where to park. Law enforcement and search and rescue operations and so forth may be limited due to COVID-19, so try to avoid those higher risk activities to avoid injury and distress. And just recommend exercising close to home. Pack it in, pack it out continues to be the big mantra this year. That's Woodsy Owl. He's celebrating his birthday on Tuesday, and we're going to have a special virtual birthday party for him through Zoom. It's through Adobe Connect on Tuesday night at 7, talking about photography again, about how to be a photo naturalist. So if any of you would like to participate, the details are on the website and on Facebook. This is a list of our online resources with the Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie on-cell app for your smartphone. Self-guided hikes are just a screen tap away. You can access those easily. There are trail maps in English and Spanish on the website, as well as fact sheets in English and Spanish on bison and more. There's also a guide that will take you through the prairie farmsteads that are right near the Iron Bridge Trailhead. And there are also at-home resources for parents and teachers to learn about conservation and natural resources, as well as a Plant of the Month calendar. If you were going out to the Iron Bridge Trailhead last year, you would have seen these folks and others who set up on the weekends, mostly Sundays and most recently, at a trailer that you'll see parked at the Iron Bridge Trailhead. And these are the rangers that help people look for the bison and find nature along the way. This is a little snapshot of what we're going to be doing on National Bison Day. It's a virtual program celebrating America's national mammal. We're going to have a live feed from First Peoples Buffalo Jump in Montana. I just found out about that yesterday, and I'm so thrilled. We're working with the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center on that. We're going to show the Midewin Bison Cam, and we're going to provide some project updates, and there will also be a presentation by folks with the Intertribal Buffalo Council. Here are links to our website, Facebook, and Twitter, so you can keep connected with us. And here's my information. Please feel free to reach out by email or phone at any time with any questions. And thank you for allowing me to spend some time providing this overview to you.
Jessica, you're muted.
You're muted, Jessica.
Sorry about that, everyone. If you haven't already, put your name and your level of photography in the chat box so Greg kind of has a better idea of who his audience is today. Everybody will be getting a suggested itinerary, and it also has the GPS locations to the main spots. The main spots that we think are really great are the Iron Bridge Trail and the South Prairie Trail, and you'll be getting more information that in the itinerary. And we'll also be sending you the trail maps. And if you have any questions about that, you can definitely stay on after Greg speaks, and we can answer any questions about that. The photo submission deadline is September 18th. But if you can only go next weekend, just email me, and then we still may be able to accept your photo on the 19th or 20th if you would like to be included into the veteran calendar that the National Forest Service is putting out. And then for the gift bags and cameras, you can either pick them up at Brushwood, or we can mail them to you, or we can drop them off to you. Again, that just goes through email coordination with me. And then with that, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Greg.
Thanks, Jessica. Now I'm going to share my screen now, and now that Veronica has unshared, I should be able to share. Do you think?
Hopefully.
Yeah. How's that?
And I'll go ahead and I can hide everyone's video as well, Greg, so everybody can see the whole presentation.
So do you see Zoom or do you see my PowerPoint?
We see your PowerPoint. It looks good.
Good,
Yep.
good. Okay.
Yeah, just enlarge the screen. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop everybody's video just so you can see the whole
Oh, good.
screen.
Thank you. Now, does everyone just see my slides, or do we still see pictures on your of each other?
I can see you, Greg, and Jessica, and I see a few other participants that have not, that are still, their video is still showing.
Yep.
Oh, now my video stopped. Okay.
Okay. So my goal, my hope is that you can only see my slides and not the pictures of everyone.
Now they're all gone, and including you, Greg, just
Excellent.
the slides.
Okay.
The slideshow is all we see now.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed.
You're welcome.
Okay. So I'm real happy to be here and to be talking to veterans about a favorite subject of mine, and that's photography and photo editing. A little bit about me. I spent 8.5 years in the nuclear Navy. 26 plus years after leaving the Navy was spent in commercial nuclear power. I retired in 2011, and since then have just been doing fun stuff like travel, really pursuing a lot more photography. I'm active in Will County Audubon. I'm active volunteer at Midewin and a trustee at my church. We are going to hit, in the short time we have together today, we're going to hit just some basics of photography and photo editing. And I encourage you to provide feedback to our hosts today, Jessica and Veronica, on what else you might like to learn about, what other types of things that you would like to see programming on. And I'm sure they will do whatever they can to accommodate, excuse me, accommodate you. I'm going to give a real quick plug for Will County Audubon. We meet from September to May once a month, and we always have a program. We take occasional field trips. There's a newsletter. You don't have to be a member to go on field trips. You don't have to be a member to attend the monthly meetings. Just follow instructions on the website to get to our Zoom meetings. We'd love to have you. I spent many years in the training business in the commercial nuclear power industry. So as a good trainer, I'm going to talk real briefly about what I want to accomplish with you today. I want to help improve your understanding of the exposure triangle, focus and sharpness, and methods to control the exposure triangle with your camera. And as far as editing, is concerned, I'm going to talk a little bit about file format, and then I'm going to demonstrate to you with Adobe Bridge and Photoshop about exposure, color, sharpness and noise, and file size, and making adjustments to those. I can't stress enough with this piece of advice right here: read your camera manual. That's going to help you immensely if you haven't already, and even if you have, you'd be surprised if you read it again what else you might learn. All right. So exposure triangle. If you're in photography right now, even at a basic level, you likely know what the exposure triangle is. We're going to talk in some basic terms about this exposure triangle, what makes it up, and you're going to find as we go along that this exposure triangle is all a balancing act, because more of one part of the triangle dictates less of another part, or maybe even less of the other two parts of the exposure triangle. So the first part of this that we'll talk about is aperture, and aperture is nothing more than the size of the opening through your lens that allows light to reach the sensor of your camera. It's measured in these f-stops right here, and as you can see, the smaller number f-stop gives you the larger aperture opening. And likewise, at the other end of the spectrum, a very large numbered f-stop gives you a smaller aperture opening. This is a cell phone picture of the back of my camera, just to show you on the back of my camera where I can tell what f-stop I'm set at. And in this particular situation, it was it was f6.3. I'm sure your DSLR or your point and shoot camera has a similar window on the back of the camera, the LCD screen, where you can look at your pictures and then also look at some of your control status. So that's f-stop. Here are a couple of pictures that I want to talk about, because there's advantages and disadvantages to having a large opening in your a large aperture opening to allow the maximum amount of light to your sensor, and there are disadvantages to that. This first picture I actually took in my front yard in the upper left right here, and this photograph was taken with a large aperture opening, so a small number like f2.8 we saw just a second ago. That allows more light to the sensor. Excuse me, I'm getting a little hoarse here. That allows more light to the sensor, but it also gives you a shallower depth of field. And by what I mean by a shallower depth of field is that what's behind your subject that's in focus and what's in front of your subject, which is in focus, becomes blurred. So if you look over in the lower left corner of this photograph of the yellow and black striped bird, you see that these blooms are out of focus. And this green background here is actually my lawn, it's grass, but it's out of focus. And so you lose all of that definition in this photograph by selecting a large aperture opening. So maximum amount of light, but a very narrow depth of field. So very little of the photograph is in focus. Now the bird's in focus and maybe the flower in front of it, but just a few inches behind it is all out of focus. So this is a technique to keep your pictures clean and uncluttered. All right. Oh, and the other picture is just a little bit different shot. This I actually took at Midewin and in the South Patrol Road restoration area that Veronica mentioned, huge area. And these little guys, these little birds with the black mask are everywhere in that South Patrol Road restoration area. This is called a common yellowthroat, and it's actually a warbler species. And you can see that I had not quite as shallow of a depth of field, so probably a little bit larger, a little bit smaller aperture opening, so a higher number, because the shrubbery that's behind this bird is a little bit more in focus, say, than this grass, which you wouldn't even know that that's grass. But again, even if you just blur this background out a little bit, it helps with the distracting junk behind the subject that you're trying to photograph. And by having a little bit deeper depth of field, it allowed me to get this nice flower right here that adds some interest to the photo. It allowed me to have this in a little bit better focus than, say, the shrubbery that was further behind the bird. All right, so shallow depth of field, maximum amount of light. But what happens if you have a subject that you want to be all in focus? So you would need a deeper depth of field, and that would cause you to have a smaller f-stop, a larger numbered f-stop, but a smaller aperture opening. And so I picked this picture of a snake because if you can imagine, if you tried to focus on the snake's head, then the rest of the body of the snake, of your subject, that's further and further away from the head, that's going to be out of focus with a large aperture opening. Or if you focused on the tail with a large aperture opening, then the head would be out of focus. So you can take that example to various kinds of scenarios of pictures that you might be taking. But for me to have gotten this snake all in focus, I would have needed a smaller aperture opening, which would equate to a larger f-stop. And you probably have noticed that the snake is kind of blurry all over, and I attribute that, number one, I took it with my cell phone, and number two, my hands were shaking so badly at being in such close proximity to this big snake on a bike path that that probably contributed to the blurriness of the picture. You didn't know there was going to be homework today, did you? All right, so your first homework assignment is to determine the maximum aperture opening of your lens, or if you have multiple lenses, of your multiple lenses. Because we're going to talk a little bit about, as we go along with these other legs of the exposure triangle, we're going to talk more about having the maximum opening of your lens not be wide enough to support a fast shutter speed. So there's your first homework assignment, and that brings us to the next leg of the exposure triangle, and that is shutter speed. Shutter speed is really nothing more than the amount of time that your shutter is open to admit light to the sensor. And it's measured in fractions of seconds, and for longer exposures, it's measured in seconds. So obviously, the faster the shutter speed, the more you freeze motion. So you would want, as an example, you would want a fast shutter speed to capture a subject in motion, like a runner or a bicycler, or maybe a bird in flight. However, the fast shutter speeds for a given amount of light need wider aperture openings to allow enough light for a proper exposure. So here's another give and take, a balancing act that we have to do with these two legs of the exposure triangle. So depending on the amount of available light, if your aperture cannot open wide enough to get you the proper exposure, you might actually have to lower your shutter speed below what you might have wanted to stop the action, at least so far in the discussion that we're having. So faster shutter speed freezes that subject in motion. Well, let's talk about some applications for slower shutter speeds. Now you'll notice in this picture that I took at the Chicago Botanic Garden a few years ago, on the left is a little waterfall, and I took that exposure at 1/100th of a second. And at that shutter speed and even faster shutter speeds, you can see that you can actually see definition in that water that's falling. You can see big drops of water, the globules of water that are falling in that waterfall. But if you want to create a different kind of effect with that waterfall, you can slower your shutter speed down, which I did in the right-hand photograph, and that was taken at 1/25th of a second. And you see how that water, the character of that water has changed, and it looks more foamy. It looks more maybe like fabric or cotton candy. And at even slower shutter speeds, that water, the effect of that slower shutter speed on that water will cause it to have a more gauzy effect, even more than what we're looking at right now. So sometimes slow shutter speed is desirable, and in the big picture, it captures kind of a sense of motion of the subject. So instead of having a perfectly frozen in focus picture of a bicycle rider going by, you might want to lower your shutter speed and have just a little bit of blur in that photo to exhibit that motion that you're seeing. So there are applications for slower shutter speeds and applications for higher shutter speeds. But again, with those higher shutter speeds, you might start running into not having a wide enough aperture opening on the lens of your camera you're using to allow enough exposure. Well, if you run into that, I've got another solution for you. And that's the third leg of the triangle, and that's called ISO. And it's nothing more than just sensor sensitivity to light. And you can adjust that. You can make, with a control on your camera, you can adjust that sensitivity to be low, or you can adjust it way up to be very high and very sensitive. So in my camera, I have a range of ISO that I can adjust from 100 to all the way up to 16,000. And as I said, well, wait a minute, I haven't said that, but the point I'm trying to make is you have a wide range of ISOs in your camera, and your camera may have a different range than mine, but you might be inclined to say, well, I'll just crank up my ISO to as high as it will go, and then I'll never have a problem with my aperture opening and shutter speed because my sensor will be very sensitive to light. Well, I'm sorry, that's not going to work out for you real well, because here's another one of these balancing acts we have to do. The higher you set the sensitivity of your sensor, the higher the noise or the graininess of the image might be. And in my camera, I rarely shoot over 1000 ISO. It goes up to 16,000. I rarely shoot over 1000. And it's because I've learned with my camera that I start to see graininess and noise in my images. And where that first appears is in homogeneous areas of your images. Think of if you took a picture of a crystal blue cloudless sky with no clouds in it, that would be a homogeneous area. Or if your subject that you're taking the picture of has shadows on it, or dark clothing, for instance, or it's a dark animal or a dark bird, or maybe you have a well-lit subject with light colors, but the background behind that subject is dark, those are the places you're going to see that graininess, that noise start to appear in your images. So as most things are, the more you spend on your camera, the higher quality of the sensor you get, the more able it's going to be able to take pictures without that graininess. So you got to have to sort of figure out what your camera can handle and what your camera can't handle. And as I said, my camera, under the right circumstances, can give me decent images up to maybe 1000 ISO. But anything over that is unacceptable for something that I want to share. And here I'll give you an example. I took this picture of these monkeys high up in a tree that they were roosting in. This was actually taken in Ecuador. And it doesn't look like I have a real light problem here, but believe me, I was in a very deeply shaded forest, and it was kind of an overcast sky to begin with, so that was quite dim, and I was shooting up 30 or so feet into this tree where these nocturnal monkeys were roosting in this big crevice. You can see them kind of peeking out of that crevice right there. My camera settings to get this photo that you're seeing was, I had my camera set to 8000 ISO, and I had the widest aperture opening that my lens would give me, and I still, with that high ISO and the widest aperture that my camera could give me, I still had to shoot this picture at 1/20th of a second, which is quite low for doing a handheld photograph. All right, so extreme conditions, I had to set my camera for some extremes, and if you should already see this kind of a haze that's in this photograph. Can you see my magnification panel swirling around here?
Yes.
Okay, so if you don't see it before I magnified, now you should be able to see it when I magnify a little bit. And you can see the faces of the monkeys and how grainy and sandy it kind of looks. Well, that's sensor noise, and that's what 8000 ISO will give you. So here's your next homework assignment. Find the ISO setting of your camera where noise starts to show. So it's easy to do. All you have to do is just figure out how, with your camera, what your range of ISO is and how you can adjust that ISO setting, and go outside on a nice, bright, cloudless, sunny day and take pictures of the blue sky. Start at the lowest ISO setting, maybe go up 1/3 of the scale, take another picture, go up another 1/3 of the scale, take another picture, and then go at the highest range and take another picture, and look at those pictures compared to each other and see where that graininess starts. All right, so we've talked about proper exposure using the exposure triangle. And the interesting part about the exposure triangle you can get the proper exposure with multiple settings of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. You might be able to take the same exact picture under the same lighting conditions and have a high shutter speed with a wide aperture opening and a particular ISO, or you can change your settings altogether and take the same exact picture with a low shutter speed and a small aperture opening and a particular ISO. So you can get the proper exposure with varying settings of your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, but you have to start deciding, well, do I want to freeze action? Do I want a high depth of field, a deep depth of field with the background in focus, or do I want a shallow depth of field with none of the background in focus so I don't have a cluttered picture? And then you have to decide, well, how much ISO can my camera take and before I start to see noise, or how low will I have to set the ISO so that I don't see that noise? So big balancing act that we do when we're getting these photographs. I want to touch a little bit, and I mean a little bit, on exposure metering, because our cameras have different ways that they meter for the proper exposure. Your camera likely has different modes as mine does. And as we've been talking about, pictures are all about light. How long the light hits the sensor, how much light hits the sensor, and how sensitive to light the sensor is. It's all about light. So my camera actually has 4 metering modes. Your camera may have 4, it may have 6, it may have 2. That's something that you'll need to look into yourself. But very basically, my 4 metering modes is number 1 right here that I'm circling. It's called evaluative metering, and it pretty much evaluates the whole scene that you're looking at through your viewfinder, and then it gives you the proper exposure settings. And then from there, you get smaller and smaller areas where where your camera is metering for the proper amount of light. That's all I want to say about that, because you're going to do more work at home and find the metering settings for your camera, find out what your options are and how to change those. Nobody likes a fuzzy picture. Nobody likes a picture that's out of focus or is not as sharp as it can be. So let's talk about that for just a minute. Our cameras are really good at automatically focusing on a subject. It's a technology in our digital cameras these days that in many circumstances, maybe not all, but in many circumstances, your camera can focus better than you can focus manually with your eyesight. So your camera, very likely, like mine, has different modes of automatic focus, and they each have their applications. My 3 modes are called, in my Canon camera, is called one shot, which if I focus, if I am looking through my viewfinder at my subject and I depress my shutter button halfway down, the camera says, okay, there's Greg's subject, I'm locked on with focus, and now it's sharp. I can move that camera and look to beside the subject or a different subject or up in the sky, and the camera will, as long as I keep my finger on the shutter button, the camera will not readjust its focus. And in Canon cameras, that's called one-shot autofocus. Another mode of autofocus that my Canon camera has is called AI servo. And that is nothing more than the same scenario, and I'm going to use a bird as my subject this time because birds are notoriously bad at sitting still. If I look through my viewfinder at a bird and the camera, and I put my shutter button halfway down and the camera says, okay, I focused on that bird and I'm ready to take a nice sharp picture, that bird might hop over and land on another branch. And if that happens, if I have my camera set at AI servo autofocus, the camera detects that motion and refocuses without me doing anything, refocuses on that bird. This AI Focus AF, that's sort of a hybridization of the other two, and that's all I'll say about that for the sake of time right now. Your camera, very likely, like mine, has different, in addition to the different modes of autofocus, it has different focus points and areas that it will use, just like we saw in the metering. It can provide metering on a wide area or a small area. Well, your autofocus has different points and areas that you can manually set so that it will focus on a very small portion that you're aiming your camera at, or on larger and larger portions. Okay, so guess what? Your next homework assignment is to learn about autofocus operation of your camera, see what modes it has, and also learn about how you can adjust the autofocus areas and points in your camera. Because having different modes of operation and different autofocus areas in your camera have all different applications for capturing your subjects in focus. But you know what? As good as these cameras are built and as good as the technology is, they can't do it all, because our technique as the photographer is still a significant contributor to getting a sharp photograph. And because we're all veterans here, I'm going to use a firearm analogy. Think of whether you're shooting a long gun or a handgun. It's very important to have a solid support of that device and to squeeze either the trigger or the shutter release. And there's different techniques for using firearms, and there's different techniques for hand-holding cameras. And the most basic hand-holding technique for shooting a picture handheld with your camera is to sort of clamp your upper arms against your rib cage so that your arms are not have a lot less area to move, and have that camera up against your forehead with your eye on that viewfinder. And you can see that in that situation, you can have a lot steadier foundation for your camera than you would if your elbows were away from your rib cage and that camera was not touching your forehead. And I've gone so far as to assume that position and then lean against a tree to give me even more of a solid foundation, and squeeze that shutter button, not jerk that shutter button. A lot of times tripods are a great thing to have along with you. The only downside of a tripod is you got to carry the tripod where you're going. So if you're going for short trips, or you're used to being a pack horse and you don't mind hauling a lot of gear, tripod's a great thing to have. And a lot of landscape photographers and bird photographers I know that use tripods and get birds, say, that are swimming out on water where they need a telephoto lens, but those birds are not really going to be moving a lot. They might just be swimming around and just feeding or resting. Great time to put a cable release on your camera while your camera is on that tripod, and then you don't have to touch the camera, you don't have to touch the tripod, you just touch the cable release to take the picture. It eliminates a lot more motion that can be inserted into that photograph that is going to cause blur in the picture. Well, we've talked a lot about the exposure triangle. We've learned the three parts: the aperture, the shutter speed, and ISO. Talked somewhat about how they relate to each other and how it's a balancing act. And I can't stress enough that understanding that relationship of these three factors of the exposure triangle, it's critical to understand the relationship of these so that you can better expose your subjects and get better pictures. But now we're going to talk about how to control the exposure triangle, what your camera can do to control this exposure triangle. The first, and the two of these controls that I'm going to focus on here are set from this mode dial that I'm pointing at with my cursor right here. And this mode dial, at least on my camera and on many cameras that I can think of, is sort of on the top of the camera on the left, but your mode dial might be on the right, depending on the brand and the type of camera that you have. But I don't know of any that I can think of that cameras that don't have a mode dial on the top, either on the right or left of the viewfinder right here. And this mode dial, and I'm going to show you a different view of it here in just a second, but it establishes where you have your automatic settings, where you have your manual setting for shutter speed and aperture, and what I'm going to term as the semi-automatic settings. ISO, which is the third leg of the exposure triangle, is, as far as I know, on any camera that I can think of, it's set somewhere else. It's not on this mode dial. I suppose it could be on your camera, but I'm not familiar with setting ISO on the mode dial. And by the way, ISO on my camera, and very likely on yours, you can set that to be in auto if you want to, or you can manually set it in that range of ISO numbers like I showed you for my camera, which was 100 to 16,000. But I'll tell you, I have actually never shot a single picture that I can think of in auto ISO. So I don't have experience with that. I don't really have a sense of how the camera makes that decision for me based on other settings that I put in the camera. So I'm not really going to talk about auto ISO much more than that. Here's a top view of the mode dial that I just showed you on the left side of my camera. And I'm really only going to talk about 3 modes of operation. I'm going to talk about manual mode, I'm going to talk about aperture priority mode, and I'm going to talk about shutter priority mode. You might have little pictures on your mode dial that maybe has mountains for landscape photography, and maybe a head and shoulder silhouette for portrait, maybe a runner or a skier or some other little picture that indicates this would be for action photography. These are automatic modes, just like on my camera there's a program, which is an automatic mode, and then an A, which is an automatic mode. I don't shoot in those modes, those automatic modes, so I'm not going to talk about those. In the manual mode for M, and on Canon cameras it's designated as M, which makes sense. You set the shutter speed and the aperture opening yourself. You set those 2. The 2 that I mostly shoot in are what I'm terming, and this might be my own term, is semi-automatic mode. And in Canon, for aperture priority, that setting on the mode dial is AV. In Nikon, it's A, which makes a lot of sense for aperture priority. But in Canon, it's AV, and your camera might have a different designation if you have a different brand. But in this one, you tell the camera what aperture you want, and then the camera, based on your ISO setting and the light that it has, will then say, okay, well, under those circumstances, I'm going to set this shutter speed. So the camera decides shutter speed when you're set for aperture priority. And likewise, in shutter priority, which, silly Canon, it's designated as TV, and I guess maybe T means time for them. In Nikon, it's S for shutter priority, which makes more sense to me. But in this shutter priority mode, you tell the camera what shutter speed you're going to use, and then based on the ISO that you've set and on the lighting conditions, it then sets for the proper exposure how big the aperture opening is going to be. Well, guess what? You got more homework to do. That's learning how to set ISO in your camera. So find where that is, find the control, and then find what your range is so that you have a better understanding of how you can control the light sensitivity of your sensor. Now we're getting close to the end of the photography section here, but I want to make one little discussion about something called exposure compensation. We just discussed the aperture priority mode and the shutter speed priority mode of the camera. And that, for instance, in aperture priority, you tell the camera through that the controls what aperture you want to shoot at, and then it says, okay, I'm going to set the shutter speed. Well, guess what? In exposure compensation, if you have control over fractional changes in what your camera has decided, in the case that I'm giving you, its shutter speed is going to be. And so if you want to have an increased amount of exposure for a brighter image, you can dial in a little bit of exposure compensation and say, okay, well, that's the shutter speed you say, but I'm going to override you and say, I want a little bit more light to hit the sensor, and I'm going to dial in a little bit of positive exposure compensation. And in this case, it would say, okay, well, I'll have to slow down the shutter speed a little bit to meet that demand that you're giving me. And in the same vein, if you set the aperture what you want it, and the camera says, hey, here's the shutter speed I'm going to do, but you want your image to be a little bit darker, well, you can set in negative exposure compensation in fractional amounts. And now your camera will say, oh, well, you want a little bit darker image. I'm going to have to set a little bit faster shutter speed because you've already set the aperture, and I'm going to have to set a little bit faster shutter speed to darken that image for you. That's exposure compensation, and that's your next homework assignment. Learn how to, I like that giggling. I like it because I love people who like homework. That's how you're going to learn how to use exposure compensation in your camera. Okay. I've got internet sites for you too. These are some of my favorite go-to internet websites. And the first two, Digital Picture and DP Review, these are actually equipment review sites, specifically for photography equipment. And these two sites do really good jobs of giving you very detailed reviews of your cameras, your lenses, tripods, other kinds of camera accessories like flashes, maybe electric flashes. So that's one resource you can use. The next two are more instructional oriented. Obviously, Digital Photography School, it certainly leans that way. But you'd be amazed at these different birding and photography tour companies, the kind of free information that they have on their website. NatHab is actually Natural Habitats. It's a tour company, and they have a wealth of information about wildlife photography on their website. So great resource. And speaking of websites and great resources, my goodness, it never ceases to amaze me what you can find on YouTube, whether you want to learn about exposure compensation, whether you want to learn about modes of operation of your camera, your metering modes, your adjusting your focal points and zones. And I mean specifically for your individual camera, if it's a real popular one, there might be some guy that'll spend 30 minutes and show you how to change all of those modes of operation of your camera. It's incredible. And your camera manufacturer's website, at least for Canon, and I'm sure Nikon and Olympus and the other big manufacturers have support areas on their websites that you'd be amazed at the information, videos and text information that they will give you. The last two are actually internet merchandisers of photographic equipment. V&H Photo is out of New York City, and I buy most of my equipment from them. And surprisingly, these two internet camera shops also have instructional information on them as well. Hunt's Photo and Video, I see them a lot at birding festivals where photography companies and manufacturers have booths. Hunt's Photo and Video is another good source for buying your equipment. All right. That brings us to photo editing, and I'm going as fast as my little feet will carry me on this, Jessica, if we're concerned about running out of time here.
Yeah, so if anybody needs to go, we are recording it, so we can send you the recording, but yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Excuse me. All right, so we're going to touch on some photo editing right now. And the first thing that I want to hit on before we get to the photo editing application is image format. I'm going to talk about two image formats. There are others, but the two I'm going to talk about are RAW, which you may or may not be familiar with, and JPEG, which I'm pretty certain you are familiar with. So what's RAW all about? Well, your camera very likely will take raw images, and a raw image is nothing more than what actually the sensor sees and captures when you press the shutter button. So that raw file that the camera will make for you provides you the maximum amount of information that you need, that you can edit with. So that's the upside. The downside of raw image is it's a huge file. It's many times 4 times the size of the highest resolution JPEG file that your camera will make. And the other downside is you have to have editing software to even see the file. Now, you can see when you take a raw picture, you take a raw photograph and your camera captures it in RAW, and you look at the back of your camera at the little LCD screen to see what the picture looks like. The camera is actually showing you a JPEG image that it has created for you. And but then for you to get that image out of your camera, if you transfer that raw image over to an editing application, then you can actually see the raw image before you start to edit it. So how does that differ from JPEG? Well, JPEG is everywhere. Any pictures that you see on computers, on YouTube, on social media, on your iPhone, your smartphones, very likely are JPEG images. They're universal. They're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. And to create that JPEG image, your camera takes what the sensor sees, and software inside your camera then creates a JPEG file that you can take off of your camera and share with friends, put it on your website, or send it to someone so that they can see it. So it makes a small file. It's easy to share and view. Those are the plus sides. But for your camera software, which is where that JPEG image file is actually created, your camera software makes a whole bunch of editing decisions for you. And when I say editing decisions, I mean it applies sharpness through software. It applies exposure controls, color controls, contrast, anything that we're going to be looking at here in a few minutes in an editing application when we're editing our files. Your camera is making those decisions for you inside that camera. And on top of that, it's taking a lot of the pixel information and throwing it away, because JPEG was designed to be what's called a compression file format. So in order to compress that final file, it has to make decisions on, okay, well, all these pixels all around this one are all the same color, and I don't think that pixel needs to be there to create the JPEG image, so I'm going to throw that pixel away. Well, it throws those pixels away about, even in a high resolution JPEG image, it throws about 75% of the information away, and then gives you the JPEG file and says, here's your picture. Well, on your computer screen, that's fine. Or if you want to print out a little snapshot size 2x3 picture, you're very likely it will be just fine. But if you want to make a bigger picture, or you want to magnify that picture on your computer screen, now it's not going to be so fine. Or if you want to take that file and you want to do editing and make adjustments to sharpness, to brightness, to exposure, to highlights and shadows. And if you're working on that JPEG image, 75% of the information was thrown away by your camera. And so you're very limited with what you can do in editing software with that JPEG image. Picture yourself if you're going to sit down and color in a coloring book. The raw file gives you 64 crayon box of crayons to color your picture in the coloring book. The JPEG gives you the little 8 crayon box to work with. That's Greg's crayon analogy. All right, so that's raw and JPEG file formats. Editing software I'll touch on here for just a minute. There's a lot of editing programs out there. They vary in cost and power, and they mostly work in similar ways to what you're going to see me do here in just a couple of minutes. My experience is limited with anything other than Adobe Bridge and Adobe Photoshop. That's what I've worked with for years. That's what I started working with. I don't have any reason to change. Adobe Bridge is for file organization, and it has a photo viewer. Think of Adobe Bridge as your Microsoft Explorer, where you can manipulate your files, move files around, put them in different directories, rename directories. That's what Adobe Bridge does, but it also gives you a big photo viewer as well because it knows you're working with photographs. For the editing part of the process, Adobe Photoshop is what I use, and it's actually a very powerful photo editor software, and it includes a whole bunch of graphic arts abilities in Photoshop, most of which I don't use because I'm not an artist. But it's amazing for people who are artists. It's amazing the power that Photoshop has with artistic kinds of things that you can do in addition to your photos or without even a photo. So that's where my experience is. I have, and I'm pretty sure the only way that you can use the Adobe products these days is by a subscription. I don't think you can buy those programs and own it anymore. I have an Adobe subscription. It's $11 a month. It gives me Bridge, it gives me Photoshop, it gives me Lightroom, and a whole bunch of other things I don't even use and don't even know about. But it's $11 a month, and they give you updates because every month or every 6 months or so there might be an update that comes in to keep that software up to speed and sharp and doing what it's supposed to do. Now, I will say this about Lightroom. It's very popular. A lot of people use it. It's versatile. It actually has more organizational power, I think, than Adobe Bridge, but it has less editing power than Photoshop. But it is very popular. I have very little experience with it, and I don't really use it to speak of. All right. Now, that's the end of this slideshow part of this presentation. Does everyone see a great blue heron pictures?
I see it, Greg.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Is it just you and me now, do you think?
I just muted everybody just so we wouldn't hear any background noises.
Greg, I see
right.
it too, Greg. It looks good.
Okay, I'll continue on then. I just got a little insecure is all.
Okay.
Yeah, if you see it, yeah, everybody else you can put in the chat room if you see it. Yeah, so other people see it as well.
Okay. So this is Adobe Bridge, and as I said, it's the organizational arm of Adobe photography applications. And this is how I set up my screen that I work in, but you can set this screen up in all different ways to show these little pictures here that's sort of in the middle, and to show this preview of a larger picture that you're going to work with. Over here on the left, you see it should look very much like Microsoft Explorer. It's got directories and files in it here. So that should actually look quite familiar to you if you're familiar with file management in Microsoft. There's also another spot down here that has various tabs for information. Mine right now is selected to metadata, and that's nothing more than just picture information. It tells me real quickly the f-stop and the shutter speed, the ISO, shows me that I was in auto white balance. It gives me the dimensions of the picture, the file size, and I'm selected to this raw file right here. So you can see the file size is more than 21 megabytes. And then it gives you dates, your camera focal length, the lens focal length, what lens you have on, what camera you used, whether your flash went off. Here's my camera right here, the lens model. So metadata, every single picture that you take with your digital camera, it creates this metadata that rides along with that picture wherever it goes. So this is a picture that I want to work with just a few minutes to show you some of the editing options that you have. And the way I have my camera set up, and it has been for years, and it's probably time for me to change this, but whenever I snap one picture, my camera makes two files. It makes a JPEG file, high resolution JPEG file, and it makes a RAW file. Okay, so we're going to go, I'm going to double click this RAW file, and we're going to do a little editing on it. And before we get to Photoshop proper, or actual Photoshop, there is an interim stop that Adobe has us make in a program that's called Adobe Camera Raw. And it actually doesn't say that anywhere on this screen right here, or I would show it to you, but Adobe Camera Raw is a spot where you can do some preliminary editing, and it's actually it had a recent upgrade this summer, and it's actually gotten more powerful and more options. And it's a little bit redundant with Photoshop itself, because a lot of the things that I can do to this picture here in Adobe Camera Raw, I can do over in Photoshop as well. So the first thing that I want to show you is, and this is the way my workflow goes. You might be comfortable with some other type of workflow, but before I do really much of anything else, I usually crop this photo and get it composed the way I want it to be. And I have this set up so that when I hit that crop button that was up here in the upper right-hand corner, I see this tic-tac-toe pattern grid. And you probably have heard of the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is really nothing more than some smart people decided that at the intersection of this grid that splits this image into 9 pieces, at these 4 intersections, our eye prefers to see the subject of the picture. And if it doesn't work out in composition for the subject of our picture to be at these precise intersections, then somewhere along these lines in the middle here is next best, okay? So I'm going to adjust this bird, and I've cropped out a bunch of stuff that I don't want in this photograph. Some distractions and some things that I think add negatively to the photo. I'm going to place this bird's eye sort of in the middle along this upper line, and his body a little bit more over closer to this intersection right here. And I actually would like to be closer to this bird, but I'm going to open this up a little bit so that I get this reflection of the bird in this picture. And this is all just what you like to see, or what I like to see, but it's all a matter of taste, what you think is what you like as the composition to this picture. I'm going to leave it at here, and I'm going to go back to all these sliders, and by hitting this little button up here, this edit button to show me the sliders again. The next thing I'm going to do, now that I've got some of the junk cropped out of this and put the bird, my subject, where I want it to be, I'm going to look at white balance. And this is something that I haven't discussed yet, but white balance is really nothing more than under the lighting conditions that you have, whether it might be sunny, whether it might be cloudy, you might be taking a flash picture. Under those different lighting conditions, white balance establishes for your camera what it thinks white should look like. All right, so you have to set a reference point. Okay, camera, I want you to decide what white is under cloudy conditions, or what white is under sunny conditions. Now you can set your camera in these similar settings that I'm showing you in this pull down window, but truth be told, I don't set manual settings in my camera, because that's an extra thing that I have to remember and an extra thing that I forget, and that screws up the next picture that I take. So I shoot in auto white balance, and then if I want to make an adjustment, I do it here. And I remember when I took this picture that this was sort of an overcast day, so I'm going to set white balance at cloudy, and I want you to look at what happens to the coloration of this picture here. It gets a little bit more yellow and a little bit more green. I'm going to blow this up a little bit so that we can see it better. A little bit more yellow and a little bit more green. The next thing I'm going to show you is exposure. This is just a little bit dark. It was, as I said, it was an overcast day, and I don't remember what the metering mode I had set for was, whether it was taking the whole picture or just a small part of the subject that I was using the exposure meter on. But hey, you know what? It looks a little dark, and I can make it a little lighter by going to this exposure slider and deciding, well, that's too bright, and 0.7 is probably still a little too bright. I'm going to crank it down, maybe just 0.4, maybe even a little less than that. I'm going to say 0.3, and I can make that adjustment with my keyboard in case I don't have the coordination to do it with the mouse. So that brightens that picture up a little bit. I can open up shadows. I can make shadows lighter. I can make shadows darker, or I can leave it at 0. I can adjust highlights. I can adjust whites and blacks. Vibrance is something that will affect the color of the picture. You can see it got very vibrant of colors. If I take it down to the other extreme, it looks like a black and white picture. I don't mess a lot with vibrance, and if I do, I make just a little bit of an adjustment to make it look more pleasing to my eye. So I'm going to leave that at +4. Saturation, it's a similar adjustment, but it's a lot more extreme. You can see that I can take this all the way up, and it looks goofy extreme. And again, at the other end of the spectrum, again, black and white. These are all the adjustments that I'm going to do here in Adobe Camera Raw. I set the white balance. I raised the exposure a little bit. I showed you about highlights and shadows, blacks and whites, and vibrance and saturation. And I didn't do a great deal of changes, but I made a few changes that look good to my eye. And now I'm going to go down and I'm going to hit this open button. And that open button is going to open that photograph in Photoshop itself. This is the photograph that we were just looking at, that we made those adjustments to. And now I'm going to show you real quickly how to make an adjustment to sharpness. And over here on the left is this border with all of these tools. And as you can see, I'm hovering over this thing that looks like a magnifying glass, and it's the zoom tool. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm just going to zoom in on my bird here a little bit so that we can get a better sense, see a little bit better of what we're doing with the sharpness that I'm going to make the adjustment to. And I might just click it once more to see. Okay, so clicking it once more, now everything that I want to make an adjustment to in sharpness is right in front of me. Now, I could actually sharpen this entire picture if I wanted to, and it depends on how you want to edit your photos, but I'm going to just pick specific parts of this bird to sharpen. And I'm going to do that with this tool right here that's called the Sharpen tool. And I'm hovering right here. Hello, I'm hovering right here so that it shows you the label, or you might just have to take my word for it. This is the This is the Sharpen tool, and it looks like this little triangle. And why it looks like a triangle, I don't know. But when you click that Sharpen tool, it gives you this little circle. Think of this circle as a paintbrush, and I'm going to actually paint sharpness onto this bird. And you can make some adjustments to this paintbrush. One of them is the softness of the edges. You can make this paintbrush very hard-edged, but that's not something that I have any experience with. That may be something for more artistic people where they're trying to create some specific effect. I only really work with these soft brushes that have more effect in the center and then less effect on the perimeter of this circle so that it blends better. And I can also change the size of this brush. I can make it very small, see how small it is now, or I can make it very big and make it that big, but then I lose the resolution and I lose the ability to really control. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, say maybe 50 or 60. All right, so, oh, and the other thing, I can change the strength of my brush strokes too. Right now I have it set at 100%, and I'm just going to leave that there to give you an example of what this looks like when at 100%, I start to sharpen this image. And you can see as I stroke back and forth, it really starts to look goofy, okay? So I'm over sharpening at 100% just to give you a sense of, well, this is what this sharpening is going to do for me. And I'll go over to the edit menu and hit the unsharpen tool, and I'll take that away. And I'll reduce my strength down to something more manageable, like 24%. And I can make one pass through there, and if that's enough, not enough, then I'll make another pass through. And I'll get this beak a little bit and this border between the blacks and the whites. And I can make these sharpness adjustments by continuing these strokes until I feel like it's about as sharp as I want to make it before it starts to look fakey and artificial. And I'm also going to go over and I'm going to stroke these pretty feathers on this bird to just give a little more detail. Let's stroke these feathers here to show that texture, and stroke these feathers here to show that texture, and down here a little bit, and on the legs maybe. But my focus, as you might have noticed, is mostly on the eye and the face of this subject right here. That's where our eyes are drawn to primarily, is to make contact with that bird's eyes and face. So it might be difficult to see the changes, but I'm going to show you a before and after here in just a second to show you. But I sharpened with this little paintbrush these details in its feathers and on its face. All right. Next thing we're going to do, and believe me, as these tools right here indicate, there's just scads and scads of things that you can do in Photoshop. So I'm hardly even scratching the surface. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to adjust the size of this picture, because even though I cut some of the information out when I cropped, it's still a pretty big file. And for me to share this file on electronic media like Facebook, or just viewing it on my computer screen, I don't need nearly this big a file. So roughly something that's perfectly fine on your computer screen or your mobile device, perfectly fine in size, is about 1,000 pixels on the long axis. So because this is a 4:6 ratio picture, the long axis is 6 inches. But I'm going to crank this down to just 1,000 pixels along this long axis. And because I've got this little mark right here, this chain length between width and height, that's called the aspect ratio lock. So whatever I change this width to, the height changes as well to maintain the same ratio as the original file. So I'm going to go back to 1,000. And I'm going to hit OK, and you're going to see that this file becomes really small because it's a small file, and I'm going to blow it back up to regular size so that we can see it. And then I'm going to go over to File, and I'm going to say Save As, and it's going to take me right back to where I got the original picture from in Editing Pictures, which is just a workshop file that I made for convenience. And now I'm going to give this a name. And this is something that's very personal. You can name it Great Blue Heron. You can name it picture taken in Florida. You can name it whatever you want to name. The river that you took the picture on. My convention that works for me for most applications is I retain this sequential number that the camera designated, and I put in CR so I know that it was cropped, and I put in COM that tells me it was compressed. And when I know I cropped and compressed it, I also know that I manipulated colors, sharpness, et cetera, all right? And so that's its new file name, and it's gonna ask me if I want to make any other changes to file size, and I'm gonna say no. And you might have noticed that it was about a 250K file, which is very easy to send and share, and very easy to store. So here's what we just worked on. This is the cropped and compressed file and that I recomposed. And then here's the original JPEG. This is the before and after. You'll see that the colors, and I may have been able to sharpen this a little bit more, but to make a little bit better image of the eye and the face. But you can see the colors, the cropping has changed. I retained that reflection, but I got some of this junk out that was distracting in the picture and got the bird a little bit closer up. Okay, here's where I'm going to stop.
All right, thank you so much, Greg. Yeah, it was so much information. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll so we can get some feedback. So
Okay.
that'd be great if everyone can answer the poll. Just then let us know what you thought of today's class. Sorry that we did run long, but it was like such great information. And then if you have some time, Greg, if anybody has any questions.
I do. I'd be happy. I'm sorry I ran so long, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yep. So you can put them in the chat, or it's a pretty smaller group, so if you want to unmute yourself, you can do that as well. Great. So a lot of people were saying they learned a lot, so that's great. So I'll just leave the poll running for a few minutes. And again, if you have any questions, put in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask Greg. Or if you have anything else, I think one person was interested in Photoshop. So if you have any like specific questions about that, maybe Greg can answer it as well.
Hi, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead. Who is this?
And this is Joy.
Okay.
Hi, Joy.
Hi, Greg. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
The question that I have is, I don't have access to Photoshop, so I'm working with Windows Photo Editor.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that I'm submitting my pictures with 300 dpi. When I go in, it says I am, but when I actually send a file, I believe they're getting the actual size of the photo. Like, I don't think it's being compressed.
Well, first of all, let me say I have no experience with the application that you're talking about. But let me say that if you open that picture up in Explorer, or maybe even in the Microsoft editing software that you're using, and you right-click it, it should show you the metadata that I was mentioning in Bridge, and that should show you what the file's DPI is.
I believe it's still 300 dpi, but when I actually send it, it doesn't compress the file.
Well, that file, and that metadata will also show you the size of the file in kilobytes or megabytes. So that file is already compressed. Once you hit the enter button and said, this is the size of the file I want at whatever DPI you established, that file, when you send it, it's not going to change anything else. It's going to send with that metadata that you've established. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes, I'll send it and hopefully it's correct.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
you can even do this. Send it to me, and I'll look at it. Just send me something, and I'll look at it, and I'll tell you what I see.
Awesome. I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Would I have access to your email?
Yeah,
You can just
I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you. Are
Yeah.
you ready?
Uh-huh.
GRGDUBOIS as in Sam at Comcast.net.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, if anybody else has any follow-up questions or anything like that, or if you just want to, yeah, you're not sure about the DPI or something, I can also send you Greg's email. You don't mind, Greg?
No, that's fine.
Have any follow-up questions?
That-
Yeah, so I
that's
can
fine.
do that, and then if you have any follow-up questions, yeah, you can let us know.
Okay. Are there questions in the chat group, in the chat area, Jessica?
No, but a lot of thank yous.
Oh, okay. I
Lot of
just see
thank yous.
18 messages. I was thinking there might be a question in there. That's cool.
Nope, not so far. Well, I'll end the poll now. But a lot of everybody was highly satisfied, or like the majority of people were highly satisfied. Majority of people learned a lot, and everyone said it was very likely that they would recommend this to their friends. So we definitely have, especially if you have veteran friends, please tell them about the Addies program in general. Okay, so.
Do we have time for a group class photo? I could take one on my phone.
Wait a minute. Does my hair look all right?
Photo. You did that last
Of
time.
course, on a Saturday morning, everyone's got an excuse. Okay, well that's a no vote, right? Not hearing anything. We'll skip that idea. Okay.
Well, I wanted to go down on record that I was a team player and ready to have my picture taken.
You
Right.
were, yes. I have a quick announcement too. We're still hoping to connect a reporter with the Kankakee Daily Journal with somebody who's out there with a camera. It could be an instructor, it could be a participant. They want to do a story about what this experience has been like for you. So my email is veronica.hinke@usda.gov. I know I showed that on the screen earlier, but I just want to repeat it there, HINKE. Send me your Jessica an email, and I will connect you with a reporter with the Kankakee Daily Journal. Jessica, I'm not sure, is Brandon still looking for someone to talk to for the video?
He is, but we're just focusing on female veterans because he's gotten some male veterans. So yeah, if you're a female veteran, yeah, he's definitely looking to interview you.
Great, awesome, okay.
Yeah, and yeah, I can send you Veronica's email as well. So everyone who's still on the line. So
Yeah, let me know if you have any questions about Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie. If I can't answer it, I will find someone who can.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, ladies, for having me. This has been fun. I enjoyed this time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. Yeah, thank you so much for all the instruction, and thank you for everyone staying on. You'll definitely be getting a follow-up email from me sometime tomorrow or definitely by Monday. And like I said, the deadline for submission is the 18th, but if you do go out on the 19th or 20th, just let me know, and we may still be able to include your photo.
I had our first planning meeting for the calendar with the Washington office, and I'm just so excited to see the final product. It's going to be amazing. So come on out, get your photos in. I can't wait to see them all. We're looking at them through a Flickr site that all the staff at Midewin will be able to look at and share their pics for the calendar. Each participant will have a photo, at least one, featured in the calendar, and just kind of weighing out which ones. And I think you can tell us too, right, if there's a favorite that you have that you want in the calendar. Is that right, Jessica, or how has that worked?
I haven't specifically been asking that. Yeah, I can ask people for that. I've just been asking them to send the photos, and then of course, like the Brushwood, the Midewin staff are going to select exactly which ones. But I can ask people what their favorites are if they have a preference.
Yeah, feel free to send them in early, and we'll start sharing them on social media. And it's not too early. Fall colors are coming out, it's really a magnificent time to be out there with a camera.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'll go ahead and end, and hopefully you can go to Midewin and get the photos in, and we look forward to seeing them.